Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban from the Lean Blog. This is episode number 18 of the Lean Blog Podcast for February 19th, 2007. This is an interview I actually recorded last November with Eric Christiansen, the president of a company called OmniLingua. They are a translation services company based in Iowa. So they're not a manufacturing company as we tend to focus on here in the blog, but I hope you'll find this interesting for a couple of reasons. First off, we're going to talk about what it means for OmniLingua being a self-described Deming company, which of course comes from the philosophy of W. Edwards Deming. And we're also going to spend some time talking about how they manage standard work using a technology called Wiki. And there are some links on the blog about what that means and some examples of that Wiki technology. Eric, it's a real pleasure to have you here on the podcast. I appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm excited to talk to you about the different things we have at OmniLingua and this opportunity to talk more about you and what you do.
Okay, well, thanks. I wonder if you could start off introducing yourself and also introducing your company, what you do, where you're located, and maybe what some of your personal background or.
Okay. Well, my name's Eric Christiansen. I'm the president of OmniLingua, which role I've been in since January of 1995. Mm-hmm. I've been with OmniLingua since 1998. Before then, I was a globalization software engineer for the WordPerfect products, with the WordPerfect, Novell, Corel, as they had that family.
Yeah.
For OmniLingua is a translation services organization. What that means is we take material that has been created in one language and we translate it, or we take software and we help it convert it to many different languages. So if you've ever opened your manuals for your refrigerator or your microwave and you can't find the English, that's the work we do.
Okay.
And the languages, because of our model, it can range from the typical as people see, like French and Spanish and German, into some like some very obscure India languages and stuff like that. So we go find the know-how around the world where it exists. As far as OmniLingua's background as well, it's been in existence since 1980. Our current owner bought it in 1994 because he wanted to work for a Deming company. And he figured the only way to work for a Deming company is if he had purchased it and ran it himself.
Yeah, so we'll definitely talk about that. Where's the company based out of?
OmniLingua's headquarters is in Iowa, and we do have another office site in New York City.
Okay. You talk about being a Deming company, and that was just one of the reasons why I wanted to talk today. I was wondering if you could describe what it means to you and OmniLingua to be a quote-unquote Deming company, and how that ties into maybe some of the management approaches or practices you have, and how that ties into lean and continuous improvement practices as well.
Okay. What we mean by Deming companies is really trying to base our organization, especially our management model, on Deming's system of profound knowledge. And the frustration our owner had before he bought OmniLingua was most people, when they would do Deming, as they say, really got into the control charts and statistical process control. But he understood, as he worked personally with Dr. Deming and studied him, that he understood there's a big aspect to Deming's philosophy that deals with people, the psychology of people. Also deals with learning and knowledge. And he felt those aspects were he's missing. So as he took over OmniLingua and brought this philosophy, he started implementing these ideas on how do you treat people with respect, how do you motivate a staff to bring out their intrinsic motivation, whereas most of the management models out there, a lot of it's extrinsic motivation, either through threats or enticements.
So, just one detail I wanted to ask. So have you abolished the annual review, for example, within the company?
Yeah, we don't have annual reviews. First thing he got rid of was sales commissions. So our sales staff is all on salary. He also got rid of the production bonus plan, and so our company shares in a company-wide profit sharing. That's the same amount for everybody in the organization. So it's really set up as a team effort, and if we're successful, we share. If we're not successful, we all suffer.
Yeah. I mean, can you give a couple other examples of, maybe in day-to-day practice how the Deming approach is applied?
It's hard to pick out.
Yeah.
One key area is we use suppliers, and we really have been moving towards Deming's philosophy of a single source supplier. And that's hard work, as Dr. Deming talks about, because you really have to create organizations that are working closely together, who have the same philosophy driving them. And we spent a number of years looking out in the marketplace to find suppliers in Europe and in Asia that would have similar philosophies. And so in that case, as we built these single source suppliers, what that means is we don't bid out work in competing things. We set up long-standing pricing structures. So that means my staff doesn't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out, negotiations or who to use. They know exactly who to go to, how much we're going to spend with them, and they can just get the work done. So it works out really well there. On our client services side, really, our focus we always take is long-term. And that's hard to do because a lot of times people just want to say yes all the time to clients. And sometimes you may need to tell a client no because it's not good for them long-term. Or maybe something for our organization as well that may be a threat to us. And so, we really try to empower our service staff. And I think because they don't have the commissions or the incentives or the annual rankings to worry about, they can really deal with client issues, and they can be open and honest with them and trying to solve those and make things better.
Yeah, and does that help employees being more open and honest with each other, with maybe some of that internal competition taken away?
Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of internal competition. I think from the nature of the work, when you have service staff and production staff kind of always compete, but it does take that element away. If you have a salesperson who's bringing in a large opportunity, and they may not fit that client, and we want to bring another staff member to take it over, well, the threat of losing money is gone. It's more just talk about what makes sense for this client.
Yeah. So it might take away some of the dysfunctional competition that some companies might see with incentives and
right.
things, I would assume.
Yeah, and I mean, as we hire our sales staff, that's always one of the things that we get pushed back on is are we hiring sales guys who can't sell, and so they want to have salaries, and that's part of our hiring process. We need to find people who are motivated to do the selling aspects, and what we have found is we find experienced salespeople who are tired of having to boost their sales 2% every single month, or meet quotas, or who have their compensation plans tweaked all the time. The guys we have are very motivated, they're very experienced, and they want to do the selling, they want to do the relationship building, and now they don't have to worry about meeting these little games. They know, their money's okay, they're going to get their salary, and they're free to work. And so it's amazing what they can do with that.
Yeah. So let's kind of shift into our discussion. Our primary topic today was going to be use of a tool called Wiki for standard work. And before going into that, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how lean methods have evolved within the company. Either, was that an offshoot from the Deming philosophy, or did you branch into specific lean or Toyota production system type tools?
Really, with us, as we say, we don't say we're a lean organization by any means, and that's why we use the term Deming. But within the framework of that Deming philosophy, we're always out there researching and learning and looking at models and methods to use. And so one of the things that attracted us, one area we work heavily in is automotive industry. So, we pay attention to what's going on there. And we've read some of the books by T.H. Ono, some of his books. We've also read Jeffrey Liker's The Toyota Way book as well. Right. And it really opened our eyes to some methods we could use for the production aspects of our work, which may seem strange, for a lot of people because we're a service organization. But when we looked at the way we have to process material for our clients, a lot of it can follow manufacturing methods. And that's an area where we've really learned from like the Toyota from like Teiichi Ono. Some of the other books we've read Jim Womack's book, and that's just given us some ideas about how to. It's nothing we adopt fully, but it's given us other ideas on how to do process improvements, organization, you name it. I mean, it's just another, I guess, basically tool in our toolbox is how we view it.
Yeah. So maybe if you can talk about maybe the importance of standard work in the context of your production process and how that evolved, what kind of standard work you have, and that evolution into the application of the Wiki technology. If you can sort of tell us how that evolved and what the Wiki technology is applied to standard work.
Okay. Well, a lot of our work in the service arena, as you can imagine, deals with people-to-people interactions. But there is that component, as I mentioned before, that really gets down to how do you convert materials. And since 1998, our organization's really focused on taking the knowledge of how to convert material out of people's heads. A lot of times that know-how runs around in project managers. And we've really been working on ways to bring that information, to bring the processes out of their minds and to codify it. What this allows us to do is to grow our revenues without having to add more and more staff, which is a typical project management model. If you bring in another large-scale client, you have to add more project managers.
Sure.
And we've been able to not do that as we've increased our system know-how and through the documentation we use.
So there's a certain productivity aspect that's come from standardizing some of the work methods.
Right. Yeah, when I joined OmniLingua in 1998, I was, before then I'd purchased translations. Now I was going to be a provider of translation services. And the thing that shocked me was that if we had a project manager go out of town, that client's work would have to stop because nobody else really had a feel for how that work would happen. And that's not a good service to have to tell your client, well, you can order from us, on these dates between these times. So that was one of the drivers behind standardization was again, to take this know-how out of people and put it in our system. We've historically used network space. It was easy for us, it was cheap for us, and we just write Word docs and put them out there. But the questions we started having especially as we really started moving into the systemization of knowledge was Word docs get to be pain to, update and define and to catalog. And so one of our developers had been searching around and he thought, well, maybe Wiki would be a good way to do it. It's a pretty easy interface. You don't have to spend much time training people. We could set up some standards. It's accessible. A lot of times we can work from our homes or we're overseas on travel assignments. We can access it via the web. And it just seemed like it offered the flexibility yet some of the structure that we wanted to do for a standard documentation set. And so we began this, we piloted it last November 2005 with the basic deployment. About that time, though, we got audited by a medical device company who's a stringent ISO 9000. And it turned out to be really good for us. We're not an ISO company. We don't have interest in that certification process. But they gave us some good pointers about responsibility assignments and kind of the ISO view of how you do version control and paper trails and all that aspect to it. And so based on some of the feedback from this auditor, we modified the Wiki system some that we use to allow us to do these clear-cut, responsibility assignments, have the appropriate process owner sign off, retain control, yet at the same time allowed the flexibility to remain to allow the people who are actually running processes day in and day out to modify documentation as they needed and propose those changes. Yeah,
and so for listeners who aren't as familiar with a wiki system or Wikipedia, probably the best known example of that. I mean, is it true that did you start off with basically all of the users being able to make edits? I mean, that's typically a core component of the wiki approach. Anyone who has access to that document can make changes, but it kind of makes me wonder. How do you, get feedback from other people? Typically you think of, or at least I think of changing standard work document. One person has an idea for an improvement. Maybe you run a pilot, you run that idea past others, and the group or supervisor or everyone involved has some sort of consensus over whether the document should be updated or not. Was it a real free-for-all at first with the wiki of having a lot of changes back and forth, or how did you manage that?
It wasn't too much of a free-for-all, I think, because in our system for the longest time we really preach, this comes from Deming again, about responsibility. We have process owners and they have responsibility. So they were the main drivers of our documentation in the wiki. Mm-hmm. We do have other staff members who participated, and it wasn't really much of a free-for-all because they're already working that way, and they had been for years inside the Word documents. It was more of a matter of when we had the ISO audit, it's making our clients feel comfortable that somebody's in control, that you don't have that ability to go into a free-for-all mode. And it also fit our philosophy that really those who have the responsibility for the process, mm-hmm. in the end, should control the documentation. And so the modification we had to make to the wiki was we basically took collection editors and we made those the only people who can modify the actual documentation within the collection editors, which is our standard documentation sets, are the actual process owners. Mm-hmm. But we do have an area that everybody else, including myself, if I want to make a proposed change to a process, I can copy a page from a collection into what we call our sandbox. I can make the modifications, that I want to with it. I can sit down then with the team. I can sit down with the process owner. We can test it. We can check it out. We can see if it works. If it doesn't work, as you mentioned, build that consensus, which is so important. And then once consensus has been achieved, then the process owner can take that page and they just move it into the collection and it's done. So that's kind of the hybrid approach that we've taken so far.
Sure. And for a certain set of documentation, how many users or users of that process, or how many different people working off of that standard process do you typically have?
It really varies. We're in the middle of a big production change, which is going to open it up to our total staff is 40 people. So, we'll have up to 40 people accessing certain process documents and following those. Other ones, it may be a combination of 3 or 4 people. And some of this documentation set as well goes out to our suppliers so they can see, here's the processes that we're following. And then they can look at it and provide us feedback if our process is causing them pain. They can say, well, maybe you can change your process and do, this, and that will help us so we don't have as much pain from your process. Yeah,
because I can imagine with the technology, with the wiki technology, one of the advantages would be working with people in virtual teams or different locations and sort of facilitating some of that process with professionals off in different parts of a business. I think the consulting organization I'm a part of, we have consultants and peers of mine all over the U.S. and over in Europe. And one of the reasons, from a personal standpoint, I've been wanting to learn about the wiki approach is wondering, how could we as a professional services organization apply that to some of the standard methods that we try to use as consultants?
Yeah. Well, and the beauty of it, too, is because it resides on a web server. Sometimes if you're out on the road, you can access the Internet, and if, versus accessing a network space. And, you can see things, you can easily modify it. And we just found as well because, it really simplifies the document creation process. The issues we always ran in using Word or other documentation programs are people tend to want to make these things all dressed up and fancy and they're using all sorts of different styles and fonts and really with this approach we can really limit the kind of tool set we want to be used, and it keeps it simple and basic, easy to read, and keeps people focused on the content, which is an important aspect, not the actual document look and feel.
Okay. Do you have any general advice for people that might be looking to apply the wiki technology as far as resources or software platforms to look at? And then maybe the other question in along with that would be about security. You mentioned the Internet. Can you have this hosted on internal servers that would be behind VPN or firewall access for people?
Right. For us, because we're a Microsoft.NET shop, we found a open source application that works with the .NET. I know of others that are using Linux versions and things. They all seem to be basically same functionality to it. The biggest hurdle we really had to overcome was how to take our network infrastructure, because there's a certain way you'll organize your material on a network, and how to organize that material using the Wiki and what strengths the Wiki could bring. That was really our biggest challenge, was how to create our collection editors and how to get our, if you have documentation, for instance, that goes many levels deep, how do you want that to behave within your Wiki system? Mm-hmm. And so spend the time planning that right, because when we first deployed, we were just playing with the technology, and we just thought, well, we'll just take our network structure and slap it into the Wiki format. Didn't quite work that well. Mm-hmm. So we spent some time going back and deciding how do we want the documentation to work, because the beauty of Wiki is easy to link to documentation and information, and so you can really get out of that mode of hierarchical structure as far as network and storage locations to accessing information, and that's really the power of Wiki. It's easy to link to know-how and information.
Well, and it sounds like in true Deming style, you went through a couple of PDCA cycles of learning how to apply that technology for what you needed it for.
Yeah, that's right. Like I said, we started deployment last November in a testbed format. We went through a couple of different iterations over the spring of this year before we finally solidified, I think in July or early August. We finally got a feel for how it works and what we want to do with it. And so since kind of September was our kickoff date, as we're now really using this as our documentation standard system.
Well, good. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, Eric. I think it's a really kind of unique, cutting-edge application of the technology for standard work, and I appreciate you sharing your experiences with that and a little bit of insight into what it's like to really try to live as a Deming company. It's really really interesting stuff, so I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Mark, and glad to talk with you and share our experiences.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.